What would you guys say? I'm going to show you. So here's a human pelvis, bunch of imagery. I'm just doing Google searches, and that's because Google searches are what you can do too. We could look at an anatomy model inside of ZBrush, but I like to just do a Google search because pretty soon Google's going to be in your brain. You're just going to think it and you say, and it'll come. What's the difference between this human pelvis and this horse pelvis? Give me some words. What would you say are some differences? Horse is longer and taller. Orientation towards the spine. Proportions. What does the pelvis have to do? That's where you're going to find what's different, because evolution is going to be based on the function. So what is the function? What is the behavior of it? You can go kind of a step further, actually, and is there an animal that's kind of in between humans and a horse? You could say chimpanzees. Some of us also call them toddlers. Maybe a toddler that hasn't learned to sit upright. Hopefully there'll be nothing really traumatizing here. Let me just quickly make sure. Yeah, I don't think we'll be able to see just exactly what I want from here. Toddler and chimpanzee pelvises are actually kind of close. They're kind of close to each other. And this is not a bad image for us to take a look at. Something is happening here. Something really important is happening here. In this case, the pelvis is supporting all of this weight up and down, up and down. And there's a lot of weight up in there, right? And not only is it supporting a lot of weight, that brain is crazy important. Incredibly important. So we are vested in protecting that. So what this does is it spreads out. Our pelvis is spread out horizontally to absorb the weight and to put us in a better position to kind of balance all of this stuff. So muscles can be off over here, and that'll allow us to kind of deal with any teeter-totter back and forth, and they'll cross from left to right, like the external obliques, or like the obliques, the internal obliques, wrapping around. But in the case of a chimpanzee, all of this is actually supported largely by, the front limbs. Largely by the front limbs. They walk, but they don't walk for long. So in this case, this is really about just being able to kind of manage some running and movement, and all this has to be is a flat board. And the same thing here with the horse pelvis. If you're to look at the horse pelvis in this image, you see the rib cage, right? This is literally a cube. It's just literally a cube. There's a little bit of a dip in it, just a block. And that block is just dealing with sustained pressure up and down. But there is nothing up here for it to balance, so it doesn't need to worry about too much, right? It doesn't need to spread out horizontally in any major way or vertically. It just really needs to be at angle with the main thrust of movement. As the leg goes back and forth along this axis, It just needs to be able to kind of withstand that up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down pressure. Totally different than our pelvis. What about a theropod pelvis? What about a dinosaur pelvis? Dinosaur pelvises are basically, if the horse was on the thin side, dinosaur pelvises are literally this massive chunk of bone with ilium wings on one side fused with some spine, so our sacrum basically unravels and straightens out. This is our coccyx, which actually becomes a tail. But literally it's this bulk of bone with these extra little things, extra little pubic bones off to the side, but they're not functional for that up and down gravity. They're functional for the muscles. You see the muscle? They're functional. This little stuff here is more functional for muscles on the tail. These little tiny differences become really significant. I think this is a good illustration as well. Homo sapien, very broad, and then to chimpanzee and apes and troglodytes, it becomes much thinner. This is a power we now have when we are designing to kind of start to play with different things and adjust the anatomy a little bit. Now, how about insect anatomy? One of the things that I found really, really useful, and in fact, this is a really important word, morphology. That's a really important word. One of the things I found really useful in learning anatomy and different things is focusing on the words, watching the word trail. Now, I've seen lots of artists that sculpt really well. I remember one teacher, Stuart Feldman, just amazing figurative stuff out of the Pennsylvania Academy. Then Richard McDonald, you know, just incredible anatomy and form and all of that. A lot of times if you ask artists like this, you ask them specific detailed anatomical questions, they will make a good faith effort to say they know what all of the muscles are and the bones are and things like that. But the truth is, most have forgotten the names. They know what it is because it's internalized. They know there's something here and that there and there's a form, but artists don't work on words. We work in mental images in a visual library. So a lot of times, some of these amazing artists that I work with, they'll just forget what the names are. And that's really actually useful, to forget what the name is and just internalize it. And we as students, we have to remember that. But the word is our way into the image, because this is just how we communicate with the world. So it's important when we're students to make sure that we learn the words. And morphology is a really important word, because you can use morphology with insects, with animals, with humans, and it'll just unravel a whole bunch of form for us. But at a certain point, the words aren't important. And there's a concept I've been working with for a little while. I want to see what you guys think of it. It's a concept of the training room and the arena. These are two different things, and I want you guys to think for a second, where is your true home? Where is it that you exist most? Do you spend most of your time training, learning a new skill, learning anatomy, learning this, learning that, or do you spend most of your time in the arena, barely surviving, pushing this forward, making this thing but not quite sure what it is? A little bit lost, but still fighting. Always sculpting, drawing, painting, something. And again, barely surviving. Tell me. Think about it for a second. Where do you spend most of your time? In that training room, learning? I mean, you're in a class right now. This is the training room. It's safe. You're just learning the anatomy. You're learning these things. You're listening to me. You're listening to Damien. Is this where you spend most of your time? Or are you just here for the little bit and then you're off into the arena kind of trying to push this forward, do something different? Tell me. What do you think, Christian? Kristen, Marco, Simon? Shout it out. Yeah, great. So 50-50, mostly in the training room. And where you are and where you spend the most time, it's not that big of a deal. What is a really big deal, though, is just being aware that these are two separate places. And when you're in the training room, you do things differently than when you're in the arena. It's like a company that's kind of trying to survive, but they've set up all these bureaucracies. You know, in the arena, you need to be flexible. In the training room, sometimes flexibility is not the key. You just need to learn anatomy, and you need to do things linearly so that you can kind of digest it. Just keep this in mind, right? And then when you get in to start designing, your goal is actually to start to riff and start to use the knowledge to do something totally different than what you've done before. And maybe something different than's ever been done before. But one of the key elements for us is picking on just those little key strategies that make a difference in the design. And one of those key strategies that I've found that make a difference in the design is starting to understand whether or not the rib cage is a human rib cage or if it's going to be more of an animal rib cage. And is the scapula going to be on the side or on the back? And then is the pelvis going to be round or is it going to be flat? These are all visual cues that help us understand how this animal lives and what we should be responding. So is it more animalistic or is it more human? And these aren't necessarily things that you're going to see in every single game because games have different design agendas. So they may want something that's kind of just humanoid but crazy cool, you know, and it might be as simple as that. And then you don't get to use this design, these strategies. But when you're showing off your demo reel, the people hiring you want to see you doing some really cool stuff. They want to see you kind of pushing design and seeing that if you can think on that level. Now let me ask you guys about skull anatomy. What is that bone? Which bone is that, if we were talking humans? Yeah, Christian has it. This is the maxilla. So we all have a maxilla. Animals have a maxilla. And they've got their nasal bone and things like that. Being able to kind of see the similarity and the difference, this is another design strategy, right? Just push this all the way out and you can create variations of human, but you still are keeping your zygomatic, you're still keeping your occipital bone, your frontal bone, and you're still keeping your mandible. I know the words, that's great. I can communicate them to you. At a certain point, if I wasn't teaching, I wouldn't know these words anymore. I would just remember there's a form here, I forget what it's called, and there's this thing there, and you know the teeth and all of that. But I know that I can kind of keep the cheekbone here, and then I pull the nose bone out, or the maxilla. But it, you know, it depends on what stage you are. You either know the words or you don't. But don't get caught up in the words. The words are just a journey into something, and then once you're there, you know, you don't need the words in the same way that you did before.